evening. Welcome to Woodstock Regional Artists. I'm your host, Sal Michio, coming to you from my home studio in West Hurley, New York, along with David Lax, our producer engineer at the controls in Studio A in Saugerties, New York. Tonight's guest is a musician, composer, instructor, and actor, none other than our good friend, Steve Rust. Good evening, Steve. How are you tonight?
Hi, Sal. I'm great. Hi, David. Great to be here.
And it's great to have you here. So you write that your exposure to a diversity of music expressions at an early age helped you for eclectic outlook on music and life in general. It's very interesting. Let me ask you, who were your early influences in music?
Well, my family, for one, since
I know
they're
your
all
dad
musical.
was, yeah.
My grandmother was a nightclub owner, entertainer, restaurateur, performed at Carnegie Hall, world-class yodeler.
Oh, wow.
So I had it all going on from way back in my family. My dad's a musician. My brother's a pro in the business. So there was always a lot of music on in the house. Jazz, classical, show music, some pop music, but that one, I wanted to listen to pop music, of course, right?
Right.
So we had it all in the house, and that caused me to, later in life, to love all kinds of music and enjoy playing just about everything.
Terrific. You play bass. Do you play any other instruments other than bass?
No, it's hard enough for me just to tackle that. I'm working on it.
You're working on it? Okay.
Well, as Pablo Casals said when he was 90, and somebody asked him why he still practiced, he said, "Because I think I'm making progress." That's sort of how I feel about
That's
it.
good. Yeah. I've noticed you play both upright and electric bass, and I've listened to a number of genres, especially jazz, where upright bass is used on some songs and electric bass is used in other. What dictates the use of one or the other?
Different things in different circumstances. Some people require a certain sound in a certain instrument. Other times, it's what I think would fit best. Sometimes on recordings or gigs, I'll bring an assortment of instruments and just see what works the best. What feels best to me on that particular day, or what appeals to, if we're working with somebody else, what the sound is that they want to hear.
Right. Important original groups have been a part of your past, and you've played with many of them. I mentioned a few of them: the Mallards, Arc Quartet, Outlet, Sorgan Russ Stevens Trio, Tango Man, Slow Mo Productions, Walter Thompson Orchestra, Memphis Pilgrims, Big Tent, the Hawk Project, and others. That is quite a group of folks that you've played with. And I noticed that you have a number of CDs out with those folks, too. I won't mention them all, but I'd like to mention the one that you say soon to be released, Miniatures for Soul Electric Bass. How's that coming, and what's it all about?
Yeah, it's coming great. It's comprised of short pieces that I've written for electric bass for different projects over the years. They range from under a minute to maybe 2 minutes in length. And the goal with them is to try to have a complete statement within that length of time, all on solo electric bass. Most of them are through composed, meaning they're entirely notated out. Right. So that's basically ready to go. I mean, I was before, this spring when things hit the fan, I was ready to go up and get it done and put it out. So that's about ready to go. In addition to another record of longer form electric bass pieces.
Good. We'll be looking for that to come out.
Yeah, that's something that's really engaged me during this past 8 months or so when
right.
I wasn't working. That's for sure.
Well, we've a lot of folks on the show say the pandemic has stopped them from releasing new CDs that they've put out also. So it's
for performing artists in general, it's been a challenging time.
Yes, you're not alone. Well, with that, I think what we'll do is go to a video, which is a solo that you have, and it's called the Magician Isengrim. So at this point in time, let's listen to Steve Rust and the Magician Isengrim. So tell us something about that solo. I see that David Lax produced that for you.
Yeah, I played that on David's Whatever show some 10 years ago.
What a,
I had a great time. It went really well. I was pretty thrilled with it.
uh-huh.
So that piece is one of a series of solo electric pieces that I wrote in the 90s for the most part. They're all designed to challenge myself as a composer, as a bass player, and a performer, and just to sort of test the limits of the instrument, since I was really exploring the instrument not just as what you traditionally think of as a bass player, but just as another instrument. So
Right.
that piece was inspired. I was reading Roberts and Davies at the time, and there's a character in the Deptford trilogy named the Magician Isengrim.
Ah, that's where it comes from. Interesting. Very interesting. So you've been a professional bassist for over 40 years and have succeeded in at least in part due to your eclecticism. And you love to play just about every genre of music. And you've worn many different hats, often in the same day. What did you mean by that?
Well, it means that I love and have the ability to sort of turn on a dime stylistically. So I can play, a recording session of traditional music in the morning, go out and do a jazz gig later that day, or what have you. So the old change in hats routine, and I do love hats, so yeah, that helps.
That helps a lot.
Yeah, it's helped me as a working musician because I can fit into pretty much every situation.
So you had a family of music, the Rust family, and you played concerts and festivals, and you and your brother had a rock band when you were in junior and senior high. Tell me a little something about that.
Oh yeah, well, our family band was also when I was in junior and senior high school, and that was my great grandmother, my grandmother, my mom and dad, my sister, and my brother and I.
Wow.
So we did the coffee houses and concerts and some of the folk festivals. My brother and I had a rock band called the New London Blues in Kingston all through junior and senior high. We played junior high dances. We played on top of the projection booth at the drive-in theater. We played any number of battle of the bands, which were huge back then.
Really? Yeah.
I remember one in particular. We played a battle of the bands at the community theater, which is now UPAC. Used to be a movie theater.
Uh-huh.
And like 20 bands. You play 3 songs. And to give you an idea, well, but about what the diversity of pop music was back then, the 3 songs that we won the Battle of the Bands were I'm Your Captain by Grand Funk Railroad, Who'll Stop the Rain by Creedence Clearwater, and Led Zeppelin's Heartbreaker. Oh, so that spans a lot of range, right? That's what bands were doing back then. And I don't think young players get to do that much anymore.
No, I don't think so. So your dad was a society music king in the area. And when you were 15, he started taking you to his gigs at country clubs. And he played a wide range of material, and you had to hang on with that. And that was your best ear training. Tell me something about that, too.
Yeah, because I didn't know anything at the time. I'm just starting out, playing in a rock band, listening to music. My dad would string these medleys together of 6 or 7 tunes, and he'd never say a word. And it was trial by fire. And it really made my ears grow. And to me, that's my most valuable asset as a musician is that, ability to hear and translate that to playing.
Right. It's amazing. Change keys and all of that, huh?
Oh yeah. Whatever. Yeah. I'm really good at just jumping in and figuring it out on the fly.
Right. Interesting. At this point in time, let's look at another video. This one here was taken in La Petite Fauchot, Tours, France, and it's some sound painting. Tell us a little about sound. Before we look at this, let's tell us a little about sound painting so the folks know what we're looking at.
Yeah, it was done at La Petite Fauchot, which means the little spider in French. Spider. So sound painting is essentially a sign language for live composition. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of gestures which some of them have a very particular meaning, some of them have a more general aesthetic meaning. And the sound painter starts by giving signals, and the performers give him back what he may or may not expect. So it's a real symbiosis, a real give and take between conductor and performer, and it's one of my favorite ways to make music.
Very interesting. Well, without further ado, let us watch Walter Thompson's orchestra.
A conductor and a doctor.
And this is what the experience is like for me, walking around. Dans ma vie, comme ça, exactement comme ça. Je pensais, le sexe maintenant, oui, c'est pas mal. Avec qui? And then I think about cooking, of course. Because what's thinking about sex if you're not thinking about a souffle? All of this has to do really with life. And the question of God, I think. There might be something philosophically important, and je suis désolée, je ne parle pas français plus bien, mais j'espère que vous pouvez comprendre. But then who the hell am I talking to? Am I talking to an empty room? Is there a wall here? Are you with me? Or am I speaking in general to the world? I'm not exactly effects, however, and this is a problem.
It was really interesting and comical. In fact, the audience seemed to really enjoy it too. Was that a large audience you had there out there?
Yeah, it was a huge packed house, and yeah, that particular clip illustrates the more physical and comedic aspect of sound painting. And there was a moment not far into the piece where there was a technical mishap. One of my cables came unplugged, and it started making that kind of noise. And Walter immediately recognized that and incorporated that into the performance and took it off from there. So it's
wow,
and that's the give and take between performer and composer and making it happen on the spot, which I love to do.
That is interesting. Yes. So living in Woodstock provided you with an opportunity to hear world-class musicians and different genres. And I mentioned some of these folks that you actually played with. Sir James Galway, Paul Simon, Dave Douglas, Jorma Kuckerman, Natalie Merchant, the Hudson Valley Philharmonic, Garth Hudson, Jay Younger and Molly Mason, and many more. Nice group of folks that you were associated with there.
Yeah, I've gotten to work with some great people in almost every kind of music, and it's been really satisfying and educational for me.
So you make your living as a sideman, where the goal is to understand the needs of what the job requires, and you fill that role often done on the spot, where on gigs or on recordings, which allows you to freedom of expression. What's your feel for that?
Well, it doesn't always allow for freedom of expression, but I feel like if I get called for something, they're interested in what I have to offer. So I like to project myself into every circumstance, no matter what it is. If it's a cover gig, I like to play like it's me. And of course, as a sideman, it's context is important, and understanding what the music is and what's expected of me is also important. So I like to think of my skills as a toolbox. So I have a big toolbox, and each job requires a different set of tools. And personally, I like to use as many tools as possible. But sometimes there's only one or two tools that come out because that's what needed for that particular thing. So that's fun too.
It is.
Just figuring out what it is I can do, how I can do it, how to fulfill what's expected of me.
I like to quote something that you have here, which is very interesting to me. It says here, being in the moment and allowing the spirit or energy to flow freely is always the goal. Not always successfully achieved, but putting oneself at risk is part of the fun. I love that quote, and I think I'm going to print it, hang it on my wall. Is that your own quote, or did you grab that from somebody else?
No, it's just show how I feel about things. Being in the moment is not just a musical thing. It's a life thing.
Uh-huh.
Treat each moment like it's a treasure and like it's the only moment that you have. It's really valuable musically too.
So from here, I think what we'll do is we're going to go to another video. This one here is at the Bop Shop in Rochester, New York, with Jerome Kitsky and Harvey Sorgan and yourself. It's called Big Tent. So without further ado, here's Steve Rust.
The world is a beautiful place to be born into. If you don't mind happiness not always being so very much fun, if you don't mind a touch of hell now and then, just when everything is fine, because even in heaven, they don't sing all the time. The world is a beautiful place to be born into. If you don't mind some people dying all of the time, or maybe only starving some of the time, which isn't half so bad if it isn't you. Oh, the world is a beautiful place to be born into. If you don't much mind a few dead minds in the higher places, or a bomb or two now and then in your upturned faces, or such other improprieties as our name brand society is prey to, with its men of distinction and its men of extinction, and its priests and other patrolmen, and its various segregations and congressional investigations, and other constipations that our fool flesh is heir to. The dog trots freely in the street and sees reality, and the things he sees are bigger than himself, and the things he sees are his reality. Drunks in doorways, moons and trees. The dog trots freely through the street, and the things he sees are smaller than himself. Fish on newsprints, ants in holes, chickens in Chinatown windows, their heads a block away. The dog trots freely in the street, and the things he smells something like himself. The dog trots freely in the street, past puddles and babies, cats and cigars, pool rooms and policemen. He doesn't hate cops, he merely has no use for them. And he goes past them and past the dead cows hung up in the hole in the center of San Francisco meat market. He would rather eat a tender cow, though a tough policeman would do, though either might do. And he goes past the Romeo Ravioli Factory, and past Coates Tower, and past Congressman Doyle. He's afraid of Coates Tower, but he's not afraid of Congressman Doyle. Though what he hears is very discouraging, very depressing, very absurd to a sad young dog like himself. Ow! To a serious dog like himself. Ow! But he has his own trees to eat, and his own free world to live in. He will not be muzzled. Congress Doyle was another fire hydrant to him. The dog trots freely in the street and has his own dog's life to live.
So, Steve, that was interesting. That's sort of like musical poetry or poetry in motion.
Well, Jerome is a most interesting character. He's a classical composer by profession. Does works for symphonies, string quartets, you name it, and also as you heard, a fantastic improvising pianist and a big devotee of beat poetry. Mm-hmm. So last year, or was it the year before? I totally lost track of time in this year. Was Lawrence Ferlinghetti's 100th birthday. And of course, he's one of the founders of the beat poetry movement. So the poems that you heard Jerome read from and play us do musical accompaniment to were Ferlinghetti poems. Uh-huh. And all improvised.
It's very interesting. I enjoyed it, and I know he is a good piano player too. I would love to hear some more.
He's amazing, and the great thing is that I do a lot of improvising with pianists. Most of them will come from the jazz tradition. Uh-huh. He doesn't come from that at all. He comes from the classical tradition, and it just brings out a whole different thing.
Interesting, very interesting.
Again, that eclecticism that is so important.
You had a nice run as an actor, playing the role of Eddie in Pump Boys and Dinettes, a country rock play in theaters all over across the country in the late 80s and 90s. How did you get that job?
I got that job originally because my brother, also a musician, had done the national tour of Pump Boys and Dinettes after it left Broadway. It ran on Broadway for a year or two. And they needed a bass player production, and he recommended me. Acting is a generous term for what I did. That musical, it's about 4 guys who run a gas station and 2 girls who run a diner, and that's the whole cast. But that's also the band. Uh-huh. So the whole band's on stage, and you do it's dialogue, and the dialogue is sort of flimsy. It's just sort of segues between music. It was amazingly successful. I played Eddie, wore dark shades, motorcycle hat. Didn't say a word. I didn't sing. And I remained pretty much expressionless for the whole time. That was part of the deal. I was sort of the foil to the rest of the cast. And it got to be in some of the longer runs, like we were in San Diego for over a year doing this. And people knew who the characters were, and they would come in and try to break me up. I wasn't supposed to react to everything. So people would intentionally try to get me crack up, and sometimes it worked.
I bet it worked, yeah.
That was a great time, very interesting time.
It is. Sounded good. So you've always lived your life by following your passions and creating a balance between them. Music has always been a driving force, but does not define your life. You had during this acting stint, you had a bio that read, Steve loves books, basketball, and Beethoven, and when not on the golf course, finds time to make a little music. I love that.
It's funny, but it's so true too.
Yeah.
I love making music, but I love doing a lot of other things. I mean, you and I have played golf, so you know how passionate I am about that.
Well, you've run the musicians golf tournament for how many years now? Over 20 years, is it?
27 years, something
27
like that.
years. I've been part of it maybe 12 or 13 years. It's been a terrific thing and tough to organize, but there you are, right there, always coming through for everybody. So we really appreciate that.
Yeah, I believe in striking a balance in one's life.
Yes. So
at the same time, always moving in the direction of your passions.
There you go. So we're going to watch a video of Blob, and what I'd like you to tell the folks out there who are not musicians, let's talk the lay folks out there, what are they looking at, and what can they appreciate that you're doing here?
Well, for this particular piece, I'd say just listen from an emotive point of view. You know, it's about expressing emotions and not necessarily understanding it. And also it's about the dynamic between the performers. You know, this is all improvised, and Harvey and I are just working off each other, trying to be sensitive to what each other are doing, trying to build a cohesive whole out of what the two of us are offering.
And I'd like to go to the video right now, and we'll talk about it on the other side. This is Blob, without Ted Orr, with Steve, Rust, and Harvey Sorgen. Let's listen to Blob.
So many times.
So, Steve, you actually had more time. I remember I gave you a signal that you had 5 more minutes, and you guys stopped. You said, "I played all my notes," and they even just played them over again a couple of times. So,
Well, I was being a little flippant, but we were done. We ended when we were done.
it was interesting, very interesting, and I've
Yeah,
heard.
you didn't mention that you also performed at that.
Yes, we were Salted Pros without Ted. In fact, I talked to the band, and we are going to continue as Salted Pros in honor of Ted.
Excellent. Ted was a huge factor in the musical life of this community for a very long time. And that performance was very meaningful for me.
Yes.
The band we had, Blob, with Ted and Harvey and myself, which we heard a little bit. It was just as much about sonic exploration as it was the music part.
Right.
Which is something I also enjoy. It's not always about the notes. Sometimes it's just about the sound.
About the sound, exactly. So, again, you and I and even David have the same philosophy that family is everything. And you have 3 amazing daughters and 4, soon to be 5 grandchildren.
Ooh.
Are your daughters musically inclined?
Not really. They were all dancers when they were young.
Dancers.
They were all dancers. My middle daughter still teaches dance. They were all part of a great youth modern dance company in the area, which actually I performed the piece we first heard, Magician Eisengrim. The woman who ran the company choreographed a piece to that, so I got to do that with the kids several times.
Nice.
But yeah, the girls and the grandbabies are great. I lost my wife about 15 years ago, so I basically raised them myself. Now they're doing great. I have another wonderful woman in my life. So
terrific.
Things are good.
Wish you luck with that. Yes.
Thank you.
So we're winding down, and I'd like to give the folks your website is steverustmusic.com.
Yeah, I better go update that, huh?
Yeah. And your Facebook page is Steve Rust Music. Is there any other place that folks can go and listen to your music, download it, tune it to, or?
Some of it is on all the usual suspects.
YouTube.
iTunes, YouTube.
Just check out Steve's website, and he'll point you to the right places.
Yeah, if you go to my website, there's a lot of representation of the different aspects of my musicality.
Steve, I'd like to announce your tip jars. You have Venmo, Steve Rust, parentheses, Steve-Rust-2, the number 2, parentheses. And PayPal is Stephen Rust, your tip jars.
Always appreciated.
I'm sorry?
Always appreciated.
There you go. So before we close, Steve, is there anything else that you really want to add that we might have missed that you think would be important to say at this point in time?
No, I'm just hopeful that things get back to normal and we in the performing arts can resume giving ourselves to the public and performing for a living. It's been hard on everybody. I'm really feeling for the young people in our business who are having to reimagine and retool everything they do. So fingers crossed for a better future.
Yes, we look forward to it also, and also getting out there and seeing you and playing, maybe even sitting in with you one of these days.
Be my pleasure.
That'd be great. So I really want to thank you for being part of our show. It's been a great show. We've learned some interesting things about Steve Rust and watched some terrific videos. And thank you again for coming on the show.
Thanks, Alan David. Had a blast.
That's our show for tonight, folks. Please tune in again next Tuesday. We will have another guest. Until then, please be safe out there and support your local artist in any way you can. Thank you, and good night.